Да, кажется.
Я не знаю, на что собираюсь явиться, а если была стенка, попробуйте сделать
Челябинской женской фамилии проверим без очарования.
Желаю выслеживать. И все социальные процессы, которые прямо скажем, и сейчас слабо регулируется, это факт.
Дело доводилось к концу,
а попугай, между прочим, все время
и волновая бывал на всю жизнь.
напоминает бульдозер.
Потому что опять все делаем неправильно. Надо только по-хозяйски то, что мы тут наворотили. Пока строили социализм в одной, отдельно взятой из-за горла стране. Вот, например, мыло хозяйственное. Мы же единственные в мире, кто смог наладить его производство. Правда, оно сейчас из продажи исчезло, потому что сырье, из которого оно изготавливается, а точнее кость пищевая, стало продуктом питания.
Starting in the Soviet Union from 1954, a security agency that was eventually known as the KGB was established as the main Soviet military service. During the events of the Cold War raging from the 1950s to the 90s, the KGB has established one of perhaps the most interesting and unresolved cases that were once classified, the case of Nina Kulagina. Nina Kulagina was a Russian woman born on July 30th, 1926 in the Soviet Union. Although not much biography is known about her, she served the Russian military around the year 1940 at the age of 14 by joining the Red Army in the time of World War II, which was famously known as the time when Adolf Hitler and his Nazis, as well as the Soviet Union leader Joseph Stalin, were in great power. During the Cold War events starting in the 60s, Kulagina was a Russian housewife, but she was no ordinary person. Kulagina would film herself at home using the old white and black cameras, where she would isolate objects in a glass box on a stable surface, and eventually start moving them without even touching them. These are some of her films.
На экране ленинградка Нина Сергеевна Кулагина. Эти кадры любительской камерой лет 30 назад снимал ее муж Виктор Васильевич Кулагин. Как видите, Нина Сергеевна двигает предметы, не прикасаясь к ним. Телекинез? Ну что я знал к началу нашего знакомства об этой женщине? Лишь то, что прочитал. Ее не жаловала пресса. Движется предмет. Ищите невидимые нити. Или магниты у пояса и бедер. Или нанесенное на предмет особое, быстросохнущее вещество. Вещество сохнет, происходят микровзрывы, и в результате передвигается предмет. Нашли компромат и в личной жизни. Доказывалось. Не могла Кулагина служить действующей армии с 16 неполных лет. Лгала, что была радисткой, присвоила боевые награды, не имела ранений, а значит и не имела права на военную пенсию. Так можно ли верить этой женщине? А заодно и тому, что она демонстрирует.
During one point of time in her life, she began to earn reputation and fame to the Soviet Union. She was reported in Russian newspapers as a telekinetic housewife who was able to move stuff using nothing but the power of her mind. Because of her building reputation, over 40 high-ranking Russian and Western scientists who doubted her began to take notice in her powers and tested her at certain times, under controlled conditions. However, most of her telekinetic sessions were usually recorded at her own home, and it took hours of intense meditative concentration before she began to move things. While in session, the scientists did a body check on her to see whether she had any magnets or invisible strings involved, and replaced new objects around her that she did not have. Despite their search on her for any possible trickery, they couldn't find anything. Kulagina has also been reported, according to historical articles, newspapers published around her time, of her to get in trouble with the law. The court was accusing her as a fraud and even tried to press charges against her. Kulagina, however, performed a lawsuit. Despite all the wild accusations against her, the Soviet government was unable to find any evidences that she was a fraud, and so were unable to press charges against her. By contrast, in the lab settings for one of Russia's universities, Kulagina's brainwaves were being monitored by an EEG device as well as her pulse rate. To the scientists' surprise, they discovered that Kulagina was using enormous amount of energy during her telekinetic sessions. Not only did they discover her losing too much energy, but they found her brainwaves activity to register more than the normal level, and her heartbeat will undergo hypertension. As a matter of fact, in one of her telekinetic sessions, her heartbeat went up to 200 beats per minute. Starting in 1974, however, a small group of scientists paid her a surprise visit at her own home. Kulagina was surprised to see them and afraid that she might get attention again. When she knew that it was just them, she became calm and, out of her generosity, invited them to have dinner with her. During the time of dinner, the small group of scientists will record her at her home, where she will begin to move things. Despite the fact that she was able to move things supposedly with her mind and all the telekinetic sessions she performed under the supervision of top-ranking scientists, Kulagina has lost weight, complained of migraines, and, if necessary, based on her health condition, would call off the telekinetic session. One of the most significant contributions to Kulagina's PK, abbreviated as psychokinesis, which is the same thing as telekinesis, was when her mind over matter powers were being tested on living tissue. In one test under controlled conditions, Russian scientists were interested to know whether she can manipulate living biological functions. They presented her a living frog, and she was asked to try to raise, lower, and stop the frog's heart. Surprisingly, according to the reports, she succeeded. One skeptic, however, came over and asked her to try to stop his heart. She succeeded, but the experimenters had to interfere in the session since the non-believer was undergoing cardiac arrest. Ever since then, the KGB has found significant military-based implications. They reported that telekinesis has the ability to damage and even kill living things. One can obviously see how one can use telekinesis to stop an enemy's heart. Regardless of the interesting feats Kulagina performed, other non-first-hand skeptics such as James Randi and those around her time, but never physically met her in person, criticized her and claimed that she was nothing more but a fraud who used clever trickery, and that all of her telekinetic sessions were just clever parlor tricks. They accused her of using invisible strings, magnets, and other conventional methods that would be expected from a magician. Their evidence for claiming her as a fraud merely relies on the magician's fact that they can duplicate her telekinetic attempts. Despite all the harsh criticism that were presumed against her, if and only if all the symptoms that the scientists at Kulagina were reported in fact true, then the explanation of trickery seems to be unlikely. For example, the utilization of trickery does not explain how her brain activity was able to register beyond that of normal level, lose weight, nor does it explain how her pulse rate was extremely high. It doesn't even explain how she was able to stop a frog's heart. Ironically, the skeptics and magicians who claimed they were able to duplicate her telekinetic attempts were limited to the scope of just moving objects and never performed magician attempts of stopping a frog's heart at a distance. In addition, notice how all the duplicated magician tricks like James Randi are usually staged or video rather than being done in a controlled laboratory, with many groups of scientists keeping an eye on those magicians. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but I have yet to see a magician able to perform all the feats Kulagina did under controlled scrutiny that she faced on her own. Unfortunately, Nina Kulagina has suffered a heart attack due to putting too much strain in her telekinetic sessions. Ever since then, after her recovery, Kulagina has finally stopped performing telekinesis and moved on to her normal life. Kulagina, aged 63 and grandmother, died in April 1990 in the Soviet Union. Although she passed away for quite a while, her telekinetic films live on and remain famous on YouTube. So, was Kulagina a real telekinetic? Does this prove telekinesis is actually real? Sadly, I have to say no. It is still possible that Kulagina could have used trickery to perform all the telekinetic attempts, but judging by how she supposedly underwent negative symptoms, I would say that it is highly unlikely, but nevertheless still a small possibility. It will be more appropriate to consider it as evidence for telekinesis, but definitely not proof. Although many telekinetic fakes are common, such as Yuri Geller and especially those on YouTube, it will be best to consider the Nina Kulagina case as inconclusive and unresolved, since one cannot definitely prove whether she was real or fake, since 1, she passed away, and 2, it occurred in the past many years ago. Although one may be able to duplicate her feats, that doesn't necessarily indicate it was done that way. Well, that's the end of my presentation, so thanks for watching.